Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those new to the show, welcome to the show. You might be wondering why we pair all those games together. It's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so, as the theory goes, if we dive into those Pillars of Eternity games, we can glean some insights into the world that is constructed for Avowed, and therefore appreciate some of the nuances that we'll see in the game. As well, for those of us who just love Pillars of Eternity, it's a chance for us to geek out and nerd out about this stuff, learn something new about the world we play, or just to revisit some of the lore that we love. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about one of the nations of this world and a particular individual from that nation. So in particular, we're going to be talking about the nation of Naasitaq today, as well as the companion character, Sagani. Now, when I was going through all my old episodes, I did not find one on this topic. I could swear I've done it before, but I think I've just touched on this topic so much in different episodes that perhaps I have mentioned it enough that I thought I did it, but apparently I haven't. If you do find today's episode interesting at all because we're talking about the Boreal Dwarves, or we're talking about Rangers, or things of the like, I do have other episodes for you to check out. By the way, if you're new to the show, I recommend you go to episode 80, which will signpost you to maybe some more foundational episodes, but this one should be good to start off with as well. If, however, you're wanting to get a little bit more information regarding the class of Rangers, that's episode number 69 that you can go check out. If you're wanting to learn a little bit more about dwarves in this episode, which will be talked about a bit, that's episode number 56. I don't think that me and Centigraphs are going to line up today. If you've been watching YouTuber Centigraphs, who's been doing a Let's Play of the second Pillars of Eternity game, not a Let's Play, but more of a lore through, I guess is what he calls it, we happened to line up on my episode last week where I was talking about the Great Reef and the incident at Snail Burrow, and he organically also talked about it in his Let's Play on YouTube. We did not make that happen on purpose. It was just by accident. So that was a pretty serendipitous moment. But anyways, so yeah, we're going to be talking about Naasitaq today, a nation within the world of Eora, mostly comprised of Boreal Dwarves, and largely comprised of hunters like Rangers and Druids of the sort. We'll be learning a bit about their culture, some of their naming schemes, a bit of their history. Surprisingly, there's not actually a lot of lore about Naasitaq in one specific area. We just kind of get bits and pieces there. But we mostly get a lot of lore from one of the companions in the first game, Sagani. She is a Boreal Dwarf from the nation of Naasitaq, and she accompanies you, the Watcher, the main character in the first Pillars of Eternity game, through your travels, and you help her with her side quest as well, which we'll talk about at length. So join me today. We're going to talk about the lore from Naasitaq as well as Sagani.
That's what I heard. Of course, the man who told me so was carrying a staff he claimed was made from dragon bone, but I know whitewood when I see it. That should have been my first clue, but I had to try something.
If you were to go on pillarsofeternity.fandom.com, which, as you may guess, is the Wikipedia containing a lot of self-made articles for Pillars of Eternity and soon to be Avowed, if you looked up Naasitaq, the country in there, Naasitaq, for those curious, you would actually get a really small article, like just one paragraph long. And it reads as follows. Naasitaq is a remote southern island nation located in the Deadfire Archipelago. Many Boreal Dwarves and Amawa share the rocky tundra and snow-covered forests with far-roaming caravan elves who drift near the shoreline. Naasitaq is the biggest and most stable nation around. Various nations and empires fight over the islands, to the east of which are sea monsters that invariably annihilate any ships that attempt to go exploring, many of them being dwarven. And that's it. That's all it says there. There's actually not a lot here. And we don't have any massive paragraphs in game that I can recall. It's just bits and pieces. So what is Naasitaq? Well, first off, it is a remote southern island nation located within the Deadfire Archipelago. The Deadfire Archipelago is the setting for the second Pillars of Eternity game, so if you're interested in playing that game there, technically that giant area, that map, is the area in which Naasitaq is, right? So Naasitaq is part of the Deadfire Archipelago. It's a giant region within the planet of Eora. Naasitaq is one of the nations there. It's an island nation, most of which are made up of Boreal Dwarves and Amawa. Amawa is one of the unique races in this world. I've done an episode on them you can go check out. Boreal Dwarves are one of the types of dwarves that we see in this world. Dwarves are a largely explorative race in this world. They have a long-running history throughout the world, and they've kind of touched every corner of the world. In fact, when we do play Avowed in the Living Lands, you can expect to see signs or even ruins of dwarven races that have been there before. The dwarves are mainly split into two sub-races, or subspecies, I guess is probably a better word to use. There are the mountain dwarves, which are mainly seen in the DLC for the first Pillars of Eternity game in the White March area, which is a mountainous zone in that first game, and the boreal dwarves, which largely live on this island nation of Naasitaq. The island itself is rocky tundra and snow-covered forests, with far-roaming caravan elves. The mention of the elves here very likely have to do with the Pale Elves, because Naasitaq is already kind of southern in the Deadfire Archipelago, but the Deadfire Archipelago actually continues southward even more towards the southern pole of this world, where the White That Wends is. Although the White That Wends, I don't actually know if it's technically on the South Pole, but, it's pretty far south. It is basically just a frozen hostile wasteland, at least that's how I like to describe it, except people live there. It's like Antarctica, except habitable. Naasitaq is a little further north of that, so it's not quite a frozen hostile wasteland, but it's close by, which is why you might actually see a lot of Pale Elves, which are people who naturally live in the White That Wends area. A lot of Pale Elves might actually travel north to Naasitaq, perhaps for exploration or trade or just looking for resources, who knows what. I think that actually Naasitaq would make a very interesting setting for a game. So like if there's a future Avowed title, like Avowed 2 or something like that, or another entry in the Eora IP that Obsidian has, I think Naasitaq is actually a really good one because it's right in the middle of these two really interesting areas of the world. You have the White That Wends, which is a vastly unexplored region, but the Pale Elves live there, and you have the Deadfire Archipelago, which is also a vastly unexplored frontier land. But by the time of the second game, it's a lot more settled, a lot more colonized, a lot more well understood. So I think there's a lot of interesting stories that Obsidian could tell there. But for now, we don't have any game like that. Something I think would be interesting, especially given the kind of area that it's described as. I live pretty close to the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and so I like to picture the foothills of this area and the Rocky Mountains themselves as a little bit like this island nation, which is probably not true. The Deerwood is actually probably closer to the type of area that I live in currently, but those are the images I had in mind, so that's kind of what we're going with. It is the biggest and most stable nation around, and it's largely comprised of these different tribes and groups of boreal dwarves that we're going to get into more later. We're going to talk about some of the naming schemes within these cultures and some of the different tribes and people where they come from, and a little bit about their culture and their history. One such thing is interesting to note, actually, among the tribes of Naasitaq, that I think is actually a nice switch from maybe a little more of my contemporaries, people in my neck of the woods. Males in Naasitaq are mostly responsible for homesteading and organizational duties, whereas the females in Naasitaq are primary hunters, soldiers, and leaders within the Naasitaq tribes. I think it's another reason why maybe that would be an interesting narrative to have another game in, because I think that that's something where you could really explore a lot of ideas in. You definitely get to see a lot of that in play when talking with Sagani, one of the companions from the first Pillars of Eternity game. To give an idea of what a person from Naasitaq might look like, we're going to take a quick look at Sagani, but we'll return to her in a little more detail later. The description of Sagani, this dwarven woman, is as follows. She's dressed in skins and hides, and has a thick stripe of face paint across her eyes. She has a sharpened bone arrowhead that she sharpened with a scrimshaw-handled knife, and she has a white-furred fox as her animal companion with her. She also has with her a hunting bow called Masuk hunting bow, which has kind of a dual purpose to it. There is both the killing and subduing aspects to hunting from their tribes. Sometimes they want to kill animals, sometimes they want to capture them, and so they develop bows with the idea in mind that you could fire either arrows that will take them down and kill them, or will knock them out and then you can capture them. The description of where Sagani comes from gives us a little bit of more insight into the culture of Naasitaq people. Sagani is described as a 57-year-old boreal dwarf from Masuk, which is the Masuk tribe, Massuk. So she's from the Masuk tribe in Naasitaq, capable hunter, dutiful mother, and loving wife. As per Naasitaq customs, she and her husband, Kalu, were chosen for one another by their parents, so there is some level of arranged marriages within this culture and this society. The parents chose well, as the two formed a strong bond of friendship and eventually love, which, I guess is ideally what you want to work towards. Sagani hunted to provide food for her people and goods for trade. Kalu, her husband, built a home and raised their children. They ended up having 5 kids, and this is just some of the naming schemes here. We have Yakona, Najuo, Malak, Estuya, and Anik. Unfortunately, the latter two, Estuya and Anik, did not survive the harsh winters, which tells you kind of, I suppose, the hard living that these individuals have to survive through, which just adds more to my little game theory here of like, if Avowed 2 or whatever the new game would be was set in Naasitaq, you could also have some like survival elements to the game as well. So if Obsidian's looking to do another survival kind of game, like they did with Grounded, but a little bit more fantasy Eora stuff like that, is in Naasitaq is a place you could do it. I'm just saying. But anyways, back to the sad note of 2 of their kids having died, but 3 of them did survive. As a member of the Masuk tribe, she's considered what is called a long hunter, responsible for stalking game across the tundra with some other wives from the tribe. So it sounds like they break off individuals into different tiers or categories of hunting. Some of them might be like short-range hunters or gatherers who just get stuff nearby for maybe quick resources, and others maybe track larger prey, or they go for very prestigious resources. I don't know what word to use there. Long hunters, so stalking game across the tundra itself. The usual prey involves caribou and oxen. Hares and birds, though, will make for good provisions as well. Hunters are well respected in Masuk, and so Sagani enjoys, or did enjoy, the respect and love of her peers. When we get a little bit more into what Sagani is doing in the first Pillars of Eternity game, she basically left Naasitaq because there was a tribal custom about finding the soul of your previous elder and all that kind of thing. We're going to dive more into that in a second, but that just tells us a little bit about the Naasitaq people. The rest of the lore we actually get from a variety of item descriptions. So for example, the Naasitaqi boots, which right off the bat there, that tells you a person who is part of the Naasitaq nation is a Naasitaqi. These boots are described as worn for both comfort and style. Most often made of leather, they can be custom made to suit a variety of terrains and purposes. While soldiers and explorers often favor hardy, thick-soled boots, rogues and thieves may prefer soft-soled boots that allow them to move nimbly and quietly. These fur-lined boots are traditionally worn by Naasitaqi hunters as they stalk game across the tundra, which makes sense for Sagani that she would have those boots. And so we start to get a little bit more clear image of like what it is we're dealing with here. I don't know about you guys, like I picture huts, with I suppose it would be some sort of insulation from the fur of animals that they took down, or I'm not sure what you use for insulation if you're making huts in the middle of a frozen tundra, but that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of here. And so like most of like what the people do are done indoors in these small areas, and they just have to like really maximize living off the land. And the fact that like small ones like children can sometimes not survive really tough winters there, I think just again speak even more to the harshness of this area, which makes me think even more about the Pale Elves who live in the White That Wens, which is even more of a wasteland. Like, how do they survive that? I have talked about the White That Wens and the Pale Elves there. If you're interested, go check that episode out. But from here, we're going to go through some items and read their descriptions to see what lore we can pull out and get a little bit more of a rounded image of what we're seeing. I have a warbow, some armor, a spear, a hammer, a hunting bow, and an item description for some food that gives us a little bit more information about Naasitaq. This next piece of lore comes from a new unique warbow called Borasain, which is a unique war found in the first Pillars of Eternity game. This description gives us the name of another clan within Naasitaq. It starts off saying the dwarven clan of Langmir dwelt within the wilds of Naasitaq. So we have the Masuk clan that Sagani's from, but we all have this other one, Langmir. So these different clans and different tribes, different like sub-nations, if you will, living within the grand nation of Naasitaq. The dwarven clan of Langmir were hunting game and surviving off of the harsh land. Summers were brief when winters were difficult, but the winter of 2562 AI, which is around 250-ish years before the events of the first Pillars of Eternity game, was one of the hardest in the tribe's long history. A mighty snow leopard had established a nearby territory, scaring off much of the game near the village. By Faunoten, which I believe is like late autumn, the hunters were returning with little more than rabbits, and the winter freeze was nigh. A dozen of the best hunters stuck out across the tundra, determining to hunt the great cat. So right here we're getting some insight into kind of how they lived. Like obviously, so you have like the short hunters, I'm calling them, and the long hunters. These short hunters are kind of coming back with very little animals or rabbits for resources and food, because there's this really big snow leopard that is scaring everything away. And so the long hunters are getting sent out now to deal with the snow leopard. So we're getting an insight here into what it is the long hunters are responsible for. It sounds like their work ensures the longevity of their people. The beast was craftier than they'd planned, and by Iniverna, which is another seasonal thing, I think that's like early winter or something, I'll have to look it up, half of the hunters and most of their hunting foxes had been slain without so much as wounding the leopard. They use animal companions. Actually, when you meet Sagani in the first game, she has an animal companion, a white fox I already mentioned, Itumak. Desperate and furious, one of the hunters crafted a bow from the bones of her slain fox, so she took her animal companion and made a bow out of her, which is not a light thing, by the way. Like, go and listen to my episode on Rangers. The spiritual bond that exists between a hunter and their animal companion is more than just that of like, oh, it's my beloved pet. There is quite literally a spiritual bond, not just like a metaphor. There is literally the souls of these two creatures are bonded together in a very special way, because souls in this world are tangible and real, and they have like an actual mechanical, concrete effect on the world around them. So her animal companion fox dying is a very big and tragic thing, and it would deeply impact her on like a metaphysical level even. So she created this warbow, Borasane, out of the bones of her slain fox companion. As her remaining companions looked upon her, it seemed that all of her rage was channeled into the weapon. So that's actually something that can happen. Literally, like, you can have part of your soul imprint this rage into an actual object. And when she was carving and shaping it, this is what was going on. When her work was complete, she set off and tracked the beast to its lair. At once she killed it. She decorated her bow with the teeth as a reminder of the deed and the long and tragic hunt. So there we have a description of Borasane and the story of this one hunter who lost their animal companion. And it kind of gives insight into what it is that long hunters can do within their societies. This next object, Jack of Wide Waters, is a unique padded armor in the first Pillars of Eternity game. And this talks a little bit more about an Amauan swashbuckler named Kakuma, but at one point in the description of this person, Kakuma, it says that among her most frequent clients, her being the Kakuma person, were the Naasitaq dwarves, who ventured in the continents to the north in both personal and tribal sojourns. Her fair dealings, bravery in combat, and skill at sea made Kakuma a loved and respected figure in the archipelago and among the Naasitaq. And so this kind of gives us a little bit of insight into the value system of the Naasitaq. Because right now we've kind of described the hardy living, we've kind of described a little bit of what their customs might be like, and we can kind of make inferences on what they might be like. But, you know, if you're of a different persuasion or temperance, you might think to yourself, well, it sounds like the Naasitaq could very easily become very cruel, or they could become very aggressive, and they can become hardened or xenophobic or whatever, right? You could probably justify that. You could even say the opposite. It really kind of depends on how you're interpreting these things. But this little section here says that bravery in combat and skill at sea were seen as honorable and respected amongst the Naasitaq people. So bravery and competence are two values that they really have. It doesn't tell us everything, obviously, but that gives us a little bit more insight. Next, there is a weapon called Stalker's Patience, which is a spear in Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, and this tells the story of a person named Ajumut. Ajumut, a dwarf matron of Naasitaq, carried this spear on many of her long hunts. To feed her tribe, she required a tool that could put a beast down quickly from ambush. She had no intention of dishonoring herself or the hunt by merely maiming her quarry. If she failed to grant the animal a clean kill, the barbed spear hood at least granted her assurance her prey would tire, weaken, and expire from blood loss. So this gives a little bit more insight into the way that they think there. Now, obviously, as being a hunting tribal nation, they might have some spiritual or ritualistic or customary practices around hunting and like honoring the hunt and all that kind of thing. You can very easily read into things like that. And this gives us a little bit more of a pragmatic vibe, at least in my opinion, that obviously the hunt is very important to them. They probably are very heavily associated with the god Galawain, the lord of the hunt in all of its forms. But in this instance here, you know, she's thinking about how like it would dishonor her as well as the hunt itself and probably the animal herself if she injures an animal but it escapes. And so she's created this weapon where as long as she strikes the animal, you know, even if it gets away, like even if she didn't hit the animal and take it out right away, the animal won't get very far before it dies of its wounds because of the way that this weapon is made. And it's a very pragmatic way of doing things. You don't want to lose resources such as a spear. You don't want to waste time chasing prey that ends up getting away. You want to make sure that you're being as efficient as possible. And that's kind of what it sounds like the point of this weapon is that it is ensuring that will happen. So there's a pragmatic nature to them, which makes sense, right? Because they live in a very harsh climate. So you'd want to make sure that you're absolutely maximizing everything that you have at your disposal, including how efficient you are at hunting, even when you make mistakes. Next is a warhammer from the second Pillars of Eternity game, specifically the Beast of Winter DLC, called Glacierbane. The hilt of this pickaxe is wrapped in layers of heavily worn cloth, each older than the last. Etched along the wooden grip are dozens of tiny pictograms, tales of Enutanic dwarves from Naasitaq. Enutanic is the kind of local language name for boreal dwarves. Some of the carvings are neat and precise, others are nearly indecipherable. They tell stories of long treks across frozen tundra, battles with massive beasts, and snow-covered Adra pillars. The most recent images depict an island of ice slowly expanding to the north of Naasitaq. That last little bit there about the ice island probably is in reference to the actual iceberg that you go on in the Pillars of Eternity 2 game when you get the Beast of Winter DLC. This doesn't tell us anything very insightful other than some of the ways that they might record history. It sounds like that they might etch things into their weapons. They might have also done stone paintings as well. That's how they might actually record some of their history. And some of the things that are important enough that they would want to write down are stories of long treks across frozen tundra, so like how they got from one place to another, or like what it was like. Battles with massive beasts, those are notable moments within their tribal history. And snow-covered Adra pillars. Adra is a really important resource in this world. It's one of the most important focal points for the games, and I'm sure it will be in Avowed. Adra is essentially a naturally occurring gemstone in this world that can house soul energy in it, so souls can actually go into these things. And it's very important in every nation and culture and faction in this world. And there is very likely a spiritual or custom or cultural attachment to Adra for the Naasitaq. I don't know what that stuff might have been, but obviously the snow-covered Adra pillars that they would run into were worth noting where they were. Perhaps that's how they mark territory, perhaps that's how they mark areas that they're in. Once you reach this Adra pillar, you're now in someone's territory. Like, who knows, right? That's just me speculating a little bit. The next item is a hunting bow called Amina's Legacy. It's a unique bow from the second Pillars of Eternity game. This one does refer to someone we've already talked about, Ajamut, who I mentioned a few items ago, but this is about Amina, Aamiina. Amina of the Blue Water Tribe, daughter of the revered Ajamut, carried on her mother's duties after the death of the matron huntress. So we already talked about Ajamut in a previous entry, and it seems like they're part of a tribe called the Blue Water Tribe. So we have the Blue Water Tribe, we've also talked about the Masuk Tribe, as well as I can't remember what it was, the Lung something tribe, the Langmuir Tribe. So that's 3 tribes we've talked about so far. To secure her status as the successor of her foremother, Amina enrolled in the challenge of Naasitaq and Sagani. I have no idea what that is, but it's a trial of this name. Far from a game, this trial pitted the young dwarf against all the dangers of Naasitaq. She spent 3 weeks in the wild, battling endless blizzards and ferocious beasts. Her bow was her only means of defense and subsistence. So it sounds like it's a trial of endurance as well as skill. When her trial was complete, Amina was trekking for home when she happened across a hungry frost drake stalking towards Blue Water Village. A frost drake would be like a juvenile dragon, and frost just being the type of dragon that it is. So it's like a young dragon, but not quite at the point where you would call it a dragon. It would be, as I said, juvenile. But this young drake was stalking towards her village of Blue Water, and it was using the storm to hide its approach. With no consideration for her own safety, Amina raised her horn and trumpeted a warning to the Blue Water warriors, who mobilized in time to fend off this beast. Denied its prize, the fearsome drake turned on Amina. The young huntress knocked and loosed, slaying the drake with a single arrow to the heart. Her bold actions secured her place among the matron huntresses that came before her. And so this is how Amina gained her legacy, which is the name of this bow. Not only did she complete the trial of Naasitaq and Sagani, she also one-shotted a young dragon with this bow that she had. And so her bow entered into kind of a thing of legend and kind of became a prized possession of her tribe, it would seem. And through all this, I hope that we're getting a little bit more of an understanding of what these people groups are like. And I like that it's just vague enough that there's also a lot of empty spaces for us to fill in ourselves with our own minds, especially if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, or especially if Obsidian wants to focus on a game down the road in this area. I'm really pushing for it, just because the more I get into it, the more I think this is actually a really interesting area. Then again, I said that about Rawatai as well in my Rawatai episode, so whatever. The last item that I want to talk about before we talk about Sagani herself is something called Brew Battered Issei. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's Y-S-A-E. Brew Battered Issei. This is a food that you can have in the Beast of Winter DLC. It's referred to as a diplomatic delicacy, and this recipe blends the cuisine of the Optopo and Inuitic dwarves. Optopo are the mountain dwarves, and the Inuitic, which I've already mentioned, are the boreal dwarves. So it blends the cultural cuisines of both of these dwarven societies. Though by no means common in Naasitaq because of the scarcity of flour, the meal remains a favorite of the Inuitic during celebrations. Traditionally fried in whale oil, these thick, flaky fillets of fish are crusted in a light, crunchy batter and served with pickled seaweed. So it's just fish and chips. It's just fish and chips. But but anyways, the important kind of, I guess, lore-related thing here about Naasitaq is that they have it's like a scarcity of flour is how it's described here, which doesn't tell us really a lot about their dietary customs, but it does tell us something that they don't have a lot of. And so maybe for those of you who have a little bit more knowledge in that kind of area of history and all that, maybe perhaps you know a little bit more about natural resources, that if it was a place that doesn't have flour, then perhaps there are other resources that they are rich in. That might give you an idea of the types of food that these people would eat. That's it for the Naasitaq people. I'm going to end off with some names that we have heard here, as well as some other names of individuals throughout the games. Just to give you an idea of the flavor, in case you're thinking you want to roleplay as a character, both in the Pillars of Eternity game or as a tabletop role-playing game, this gives you a little bit of stuff to work with. We have Sagani, we have Tuliak Longfrost, so that's an interesting last name there. We have Akiuk, I-K-I-U-Q, Persok, P-E-R-S-O-Q, more on him later, Ajumat, and that's A-J-U-M-A-A-T. I see a lot of doubled vowels in some of these names, and so that seems to be a particularly common thing in their naming scheme. I mean, obviously, in the name of the nation, Naasitaq is N-A-A, and there's also a lot of the use of the letter Q. Kali, K-A-A-L-I, Amina, A-A-M-I-I-N-A, Tatok, Kinuk, and Idzia, I-Z-Z-I-A. I would kind of suspect that last one to be a bit Valian, but there we go. And so that's everything about Naasitaq. Let's dive into Sagani.
The long version. Here we go. I'm from an island to the far south called Naasitaq. I came here looking for a village elder, a man we knew as Persok. I'm a hunter back home, so tracking someone wouldn't normally be a problem. But Persok's trail is cold, to say the least.
Now, I've got a little bit of Sagani's background, like where she's from, roughly her age. She's from Masuk. She is a long hunter. She is a wife, as well as a respected member of the society. But why do you run into her then when you're playing Pillars of Eternity 1, when you're in the Deerwood, which is on the continent of the Eastern Reach, far away from where Naasitaq is? Well, she is currently in the midst of a hunt for Persok, P-E-R-S-O-Q, the reincarnated elder of her tribe. This is part of the long-running side quest or companion quest called The Long Hunt. Essentially what's gone on here is Sagani is tasked with leaving her tribe to go and find the reincarnated soul of their previous elder to then tell the elder the state of their tribe and how they're doing. This is part of their customs from the tribe of Masuk, and that's what they do. You have an elder that led the tribe, and eventually that elder will die, and that soul will then leave that body and go and reincarnate in some other person or creature. And so the goal of this person who leaves the tribe is to go find that reincarnated soul with Persok in it, the name of this particular elder, and then to report to that elder in some way, shape, or form what has gone on. Obviously, most of the time, the people that have this soul of this previous person don't really know what they're talking about, because you don't normally just have those memories come to mind. But still, this is just part of what they do, right? And so when you run into Sagani as the Watcher in the first Pillars of Eternity game, she confides in you that this is what she's trying to do, but she's having a hard time doing it. So the question I had was, like, how does she know when to go or who gets chosen? And it actually says here in the Pillars of Eternity fandom article that when omens were determined based on caribou migrations and casting seal bones, the village huntresses drew shark teeth to determine who would have the honor to find Persoc. So it sounds like there is a whole custom and ritual that goes along this. There's signs in nature, like caribou migrations, that say, okay, it's time for someone to leave to go find the reincarnated soul of a previous elder. Sagani drew the smallest shark tooth, and so she was the one to leave. She did not want to leave her husband, Kalu, or her children, but, this is her quest, so she went on it. She took an Audra figurine in hand, which we've talked about before, and her animal companion, Ichumak. And she's been traveling for a very long time. She didn't expect it to take as long as she's been going, which is 5 years now. So she's been away from her family and her tribe for 5 years. It took her all the way to the Deerwood, which is incredibly far away from the island nation of Naasitaq. And it's not uncommon for souls to reincarnate in the area that they are, but in this case, the Persoc reincarnated very far away. She's been having a difficult time with it. Over in the Deerwood, it's a strange land, and she's a stranger in it. As well, she's running into people who are conning her out of money. She doesn't really know where to go. She doesn't know the land or the area, so she's having a hard time doing it, on top of being gone for 5 years. But you, as the Watcher, can help her out in her quest. Being able to read souls as a Watcher is a helpful person to have when you're looking for someone who has the soul of someone else. This entire tradition is sacred for her group of people, the Masuk. It's called the Tarnek Ilitsak, Tarneq-Ilitsaak, which I guess stands for soul recovery or something like that. It occurs once per generation, and a huntress is chosen to seek out the soul of a respectful and long-dead village elder, to tell him how the village fares and what the people remember of him. So with your abilities as a Watcher, you interact with her Audra figurine, which is kind of like her guiding item, if you will, like her compass that leads her in the direction of the soul. And you as a Watcher use your abilities to kind of hone in a little bit better on where Persoc is. And eventually you can, if you choose to follow the quest, find where Persoc is and have a conclusion to Sagani's quest. And depending on what you choose throughout that quest will determine the outcome for Sagani. In one instance, she'll return back to her village, but she's never satisfied with how it went, and she ends up going missing in a blizzard during one of her long hunts. In another option, Sagani will return to her village and she'll retire happily with her family. In another option, she will become a respected elder of her village. Or she doesn't complete it at all, and Persoc's trail goes cold. Sagani returns to Masuk many years later. Okay, so these are just some options, and I'm not going to tell you how any of these things end, but these are some potential endings to her quest line, depending on how you go about doing it. Some lore that we do learn from some of her endings, though, I'm not going to tell you again the context of how you get their endings, but we do learn a little bit. For instance, it is a 4-month journey to Naasitaq from the Deerwood, so that tells you how far away they are. Again, she's traveling on foot and then by boat over sea. It also mentions that when she returns, she finds the food bland and a little bit more unsatisfying, which tells you a little bit about, again, their dietary customs there, and that they're not eating food so much for the delicacy of it, but for the sustenance of it. This isn't because the food and all that is necessary completely like that. That is also part of the influence that you as the character have on Sagani, that she returns in this state of mind, per se. So there's a chance for that to happen, but it could give you a little bit of insight. One interesting thing, though, is that Sagani does have, in one of her outcomes, the potential to have gone into the living lands, and her search will have taken many extra years. So there's one thing to note, is that if we do play Avowed and we happen to see Sagani running around in the living lands, that really heavily implies that there is one particular canon ending to how Sagani's side quest went. I highly doubt this will be the one that Obsidian chose to canonize, but then again, they've never shied away from that kind of thing before, so that potential is there. Again, I'm not going to spoil how it goes, but there is a chance we could run into her in the living lands. And that's everything I really want to talk about regarding Naasitaq and Sagani. I usually like to give a little bit more focus onto the companions, but I mean, really, once you understand where Sagani comes from, it's just a matter of kind of soaking in that culture through the things that she says, as well as the descriptions of items that we see from the Pillars of Eternity games themselves. And you really just get to know who Sagani is by playing the first Pillars of Eternity game, seeing the trials that she's going through, how much she misses home, and what that home is actually like. So I hope that everyone enjoyed today's episode where we discussed Naasitaq, the stable island nation within the Deadfire Archipelago just north of the White That Wends, and the types of tribes that live there, as well as some of the cultural stuff, as well as the customary things, and a bit about their practices, and discussing Sagani and who she is as a character. But before we close off today's episode, let's ask, is there anything that this might have to do with Avowed?
is an oath worth the weight of a crown.
There's nothing obvious that comes glaring out to me about what this could have to do with Avowed. Obviously, I mentioned there is technically a canon ending to her side quest from the first Pillars game that could lead her to going to the Living Lands. So we do have a chance of actually running into Sagani. I highly doubt it, but there's a chance. And whether or not we're going to have any interactions with Naasitaq people, we can't really say for sure. There does seem to be a large grouping of different factions and nations in the Living Lands, just based off of that June 2023 trailer. When Avowed main character is walking into that port town, you can see a bunch of flags and banners in the background of different factions and nations. And there seems to be a large breadth of them, some that are actually very, very far away from the Living Lands. So there's a chance that there could be an envoy from Naasitaq that is in the Living Lands, so perhaps we'll run into them. But dwarves do like to travel, and there is a decent chance that there will be some Inutinik, some boreal dwarves that left Naasitaq and went to the Living Lands to go explore there and make a name for themselves. Perhaps they're on a very long hunt to go find something specific. Who knows? It's definitely a plausible thing that we could run into people from Naasitaq in the Living Lands. How deep of an interaction that will be for us, the player character, can honestly be up in the air. It just depends if the writers and developers at Obsidian want to put the time into it. They could go very deep into that, and it could become a huge, massive side quest, or it could just be a one-off interaction, or even just like an audio bark that we see, or a note that we read. It's really up to the developers at Obsidian. Naasitaq is not going to be something that's core to Avowed, necessarily speaking, but it would still be interesting to see. But there's a lot of lore to cover in the World of Eora, and not all of it can fit into the game of Avowed. There's going to have to be other games if we want to explore that. And that's really all I can think about. Obviously, our character isn't coming from Naasitaq. Perhaps, though, one of our companions will be, or one of the NPCs. That's really the only thing I can think of personally. So with that said, we'll close out today's episode. What I have been playing lately, I actually have dove back in again to Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, and I'm playing through the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC, because like I mentioned on my previous episode, I did play through it, but I went through it rather quickly, and because it was combat heavy, and the combat is just, again, not my focus in the game. Love the combat. I think the combat's great. It was just, I play the game for the lore and for the story. That's what I like about it. So I really kind of glazed through that, and I'm replaying it again, just really soaking in a lot of the lore. Turns out there's not as much lore as I thought there was. There is still lore, obviously. There's a lot going on in the background if you pay attention, most of which I did already know. But it's been fun returning back to this game. Man, though, if you haven't played Pillars of Eternity in a while, going through some of these combat scenarios can be incredibly challenging, even on story mode, which is what I'm playing on, and I'll admit that. I haven't been in the swing of things. I had a character that I just kind of come and go with every now and then. When I'm having a rainy day and I'm not sure what to play, sometimes I load up an old Pillars of Eternity file and I just play that because it's what I like. But man, if you don't play the combat in that game, you forget how to do it. And yeah, I'm kind of getting back into the swing of it. So that's what I've been playing for the last week. I don't think it's going to last much longer than that. And outside of that, I'm not really sure what to play next. I have one of my customers that I deliver to for UPS recommended a game, Shadows of Doubt, to me. I might buy that and check it out, but there's also a lot of Game Pass games I have on my list that I want to check out. I'm already paying for the service, so perhaps I'll do that. I don't know. Anyone out there have game recommendations for me? Something you think I definitely need to play? Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter @worldofeora. As well, if you want to just ask me a question or point out anything about the lore or have a discussion, anything like that, those, again, are the ways to reach me, worldofeora@gmail.com or @worldofeora on Twitter. If you like today's episode and you like this show in general, perhaps you've been listening for a while and you're interested in supporting the show, making sure to keep the computer running or whatever, feel free to support the show on ko-fi.com/worldofeora. That's my Ko-fi account, kind of like Patreon, except just a different platform. That's ko-fi.com/worldofeora. It's just there for the people who are interested, so don't feel pressured in any way. It's just if you want to support the show. And thank you for those that have. I've been getting a lot of feedback from those of you when I asked about whether or not you think it'd be wise for this show to join a podcast network, and I have been getting feedback. Thank you. I'm going to wait a little bit longer before potentially joining the podcast network because I've received a lot of good feedback from people, and it's given me some stuff to think about. I do like the idea of the show having more audience, like more people will hear about it, and perhaps that will be something that brings in, not just brings in more people because woohoo, I want my numbers to go up, but more of like, if people are getting value of this, and some of you are, obviously, if people like this, then I want them to experience it. And as well, I like growing as a content creator. I don't want to just do the same thing over and over again. I want to make sure that I'm growing on my skills and being better for you guys and all that, especially with Avowed coming on the horizon. I want to make sure I'm making quality content for you guys. But whatever, we don't need to hear about that. Maybe I'll do a blog or something. If you're interested about it, you can read it. But yeah, that's everything for today. Thanks everyone for listening. Again, send me a game recommendation if you think there's something I would really enjoy. You always hear what it is I've been playing lately and my thoughts on it, so perhaps you know exactly what I need. But that's everything for today. Thanks everyone. This has been a discussion of the nation of Naasitaq as well as the companion from First Pillars of Eternity game, Sagani. It's been really fun, and I hope that we can see Naasitaq again in future Eora IPs or future games in this IP, that is. Yeah, it was really interesting to get into. But that's everything for today. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.